Hi, everyone. I'm Shelly, and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm about to say something that I wish I didn't have to say, but since I am all about honesty, here goes. I'm worried about the rise in homeschooling. Let me start out by saying that I have always been, and I continue to be, a huge homeschooling advocate. And I encourage as many people as I meet who at least show a slight interest in it that they should try it because it is a wonderful way to raise your children and to educate them. And I have been all about increasing the homeschooling population. But I'm going to be honest and tell you that I never expected to see it rise in the numbers that it has been. Now, that would typically be very encouraging because we want free thinking adults, do we not? And most of us know that the public education system is not going to produce free thinking adults. Okay, a few might get through, but for the most part, they're just going to be fashioned exactly the way the education system, aka the government schools, want them to be fashioned. So, yeah, you would think that I would be applauding this. But what I'm seeing happening is very troubling. There are some repercussions to this, and I just wanted to talk about that today. The first one that I'm seeing the most, and I find at this point the most concerning, are the number of very well-intentioned, new but uninformed homeschooling parents who are pushing for getting tax money to homeschool their children. They talk about it in different ways. Some of them talk about rebates. Some of them talk about kickbacks. Some of them talk about not having to pay school taxes anymore. Which I've got to say, I think that taxation is theft. So I think that would be wonderful, but you know that would come at a cost. Again, they're coming about it in all different ways. But basically, what these parents are saying is that since we are not putting our children in school, we shouldn't have to pay school taxes. We should get that money back, the money that we would have paid, or we should get whatever the school would have gotten for my child. That is what I should get to homeschool them. And on the surface, it seems very helpful. It seems very just, but it is a very unresearched answer for those people who are pushing this. They haven't looked into what the possible repercussions would be. They haven't thought about it. And likely, if they're new homeschooling parents who have been kind of rushed into things from all the turmoil happening around us, some people are homeschooling because of the V word. Some people are homeschooling because of, the C word. Can't say anything on here. So a lot of people are coming from a place where they really weren't prepared to homeschool in the first place. So they never looked into it. And with that, they never looked into what the homeschooling pioneers, those people who really are the ones that fought for us to get the homeschooling rights that we have today. They didn't look into what they did for us. And even though some states are more heavily regulated, like I am in one of the most heavily regulated states, but it is definitely manageable. And there are some that are no regulation states. It really depends. But the fact of the matter is that we can be thankful because even though we might have some government regulations, which I don't think that we should have any because these are our children, but we need to be thankful and we need to think about what people went through in order to get these. Now, what is going to happen? This is the government. If you tell them that you want to have some sort of rebate or you want to get the money that would have gone to your child in school, you want that money so you can homeschool your kids, so you can use that for field trips and textbooks. And again, on the surface, that sounds great. What a great financial solution, the homeschooling. Do you honestly think the government is going to give that money to you with no strings attached? I assure you, when it comes to the government, there are always strings attached. And what you are asking for is more regulation, more red tape, more bureaucracy. And I can tell you that those of us who have been homeschooling for a long time, I am finishing up my 13th year, we do not want that. I understand that homeschooling can be a financial burden for some. I think that if you're resourceful, it is less so. But we need to think more about freedom than finances. And unfortunately, and there have always been a few people who have talked about that they think that they should get taxes in order to homeschool their children. But now we have this huge wave of new homeschooling parents who are ignorant about this issue. I'm not saying ignorant in a nasty way. I'm saying ignorant in that they just don't know what they're asking for. This huge wave of people coming in asking for taxes. And do you honestly think that if the government sees all of these people now pulling their kids out of their indoctrination centers, that they aren't going to think, maybe we can use this to our advantage? Sure, we'll give you the money to homeschool your children, but you're going to have to submit to this, and this, and you're going to have to let this person in your home this number of times per year. And we are not going to have the homeschooling freedom that we now enjoy. So if you are a new homeschooling parent and you are one of those who is being extremely vocal about wanting these taxes, I want you to really think about the repercussions, because this doesn't just affect you. It affects all of the homeschooling families in the country. And it will really go back to, and it will affect the homeschooling laws that the pioneers fought for so hard. So really, choose your words wisely and be careful what you wish for. So the next thing is it doesn't have to do with the government, so to speak, but what I'm seeing is that homeschooling, because again, there are so many new homeschooling families, like way more than anybody ever probably thought there would be at this point, it's being intensively commercialized. And yeah, homeschooling has been commercialized since the beginning. I've seen it happening more and more so, like the whole time that I've been homeschooling. But it's at the point now where it's in the mainstream now. Like homeschooling is now starting to be considered mainstream because you're seeing them talk about it on mainstream media, and you're seeing more popular people like on Twitter and Instagram bringing it up. And so what's happening is that these companies, they've got dollar signs in their eyes, and they are going to start coming at new homeschoolers who, again, haven't researched because they felt like they were pushed into this and are doing this at the last minute. They're going to come at them with all sorts of materials that they do not need, and they're going to come at them, for example, with like virtual charter schools that they will tell the parents is homeschooling, but is really not homeschooling, but the parents won't know the difference. And that in itself can cause more of a fuzzy line between homeschooling and charter schooling or virtual school, whatever you want to call it. And again, when they're coming at naive homeschooling parents who just simply don't know, they're going to just think that this is normal. And unfortunately, a lot of these commercialized aspects, that they're pushing a more institutionalized look at homeschooling. So like when you see homeschooling on mainstream media, they're always pushing the more schoolish aspect of it. They're always pushing the micro schools or the learning pods and all these like trendy names for things that all of a sudden they act like no one in the homeschool community ever did it before, but they have been. They just didn't call it by those names. But what they're doing is they're pushing something that looks very much like school, but at home. And at the outset, that seems like, okay, so what? Because people who don't know much about homeschooling really do think that that's what it looks like. But I will tell you that for the majority of homeschooling families, what we do at home for our children to learn doesn't look much like school at all. And if you approach homeschooling that way and you don't realize that there are other ways, you are going to be, well, I'm not going to say going to be, because for some people it does work, but you may possibly be on the road to burnout if you are not informed about the many options that you have. And I'm going to say it again, that homeschooling is about freedom and you've got to take advantage of it. So going along with the whole thing about it being commercialized is that now, since it is so well known, now educational experts are suddenly popping up everywhere, and they're considering themselves homeschooling experts because they are educational experts. but they've never actually homeschooled. They've never done it in their life. They might have studied it. They might have talked to a couple families that do it, but they have never actually experienced it for themselves. And I actually, years ago, I wrote an article for a parenting blog, and they wanted me to quote a homeschooling expert. And I was like, what are you talking about? A homeschooling expert? And then they gave me a list of people that I was supposed to pick from, and none of them had ever homeschooled. They just called themselves homeschooling experts because they studied education, but they weren't experts in homeschooling at all. Anyway, I went off on a tangent there, but I had to point that out. So you have all of these people who are popping up like on Twitter and Instagram. And again, they're likely well-intentioned, but they're giving you all kinds of advice on homeschooling because they're taking advantage of all those new parents who are kind of like looking at everything and thinking, oh my gosh, what do I do next? Because I admit it is an overwhelming experience. But they're giving some really bad advice. Like some of the things that I see, one that I'm seeing a lot lately, and it actually inspired what will likely be my next video, or maybe like in the next couple of videos, is about co-ops. Now, at the outset, and again, there are a lot of families who enjoy co-ops, and I am not saying anything specifically bad about co-ops. I have never used one, but what you see a lot of these people coming at you with is, if you want to be a successful homeschooler, here is a list of things that you need to do. And a lot of times, find a good co-op is at the very top of the line. And I can assure you, you can successfully homeschool without a co-op. In fact, most people do not use co-ops. The reason that a lot of these educational experts or newer homeschoolers flock to these co-ops, or this is what they call micro schools or learning pods, it's the same thing as a co-op. The reason that they're flocking to them is because they haven't yet broken free of the schoolish mindset and realized that you don't have to do everything like they do in the classroom. So they look at these co-ops and they kind of get some comfort out of that, thinking, okay, well, my kids are not in school anymore, but I can put them in a school atmosphere and they're going to be with other children and everything's going to be just fine, right? Well, you have to go back and think, why are you homeschooling? Is one of the reasons that you're homeschooling because the school model was not working out for your children? If that is the case, you might not want to try a co-op because that is basically replicating the school model. Not all of them, but most of them. And again, I don't want to make this whole video about co-ops, but you can successfully homeschool without a co-op. You don't need one in order to do this. So I just want to get that out there, is if you see it everywhere, don't feel like you're doing something wrong or like your children are missing out if you don't do it, because most homeschoolers really do not use co-ops at all. A lot do. I don't want to make it sound like it's rare. A lot of homeschoolers do. But I think if you would take a poll, more people do not use them. Another thing is that these homeschooling experts very often will push expensive boxed curriculum. And I have to say that most of the time it's for financial reasons, because if you click on the link, they might earn something from your purchase. But what a lot of them are saying is that if you want to successfully homeschool your children, you can't scrimp. Is that a word? You can't get an inexpensive curriculum, because your children are going to suffer. That if you want your children to have the best education, you can't be afraid to get that $1,000 curriculum for your child. Because if you don't, they're going to get a dumbed down version of an education. And again, that is absolutely not the case. You can successfully homeschool on very little money. You do not need $1,000 boxed curriculum for your 7-year-old. You don't need 7 different textbooks for your 10-year-old. You could go to the library and honestly get most of what you need for free. I always said you can homeschool pretty much everything at the library except for math. And even though they do have math books there, usually you might want something more consistent, although I'm sure some people have used just the library or library resources like the library website for their math programs. The point is, though, is that don't fall into these traps. You've got to realize that a lot of these people who are giving you this advice about homeschooling haven't done it. I cannot stress that enough. They have never done it. And so unfortunately what's happening is that There are a lot of us homeschoolers out there, and I'm never going to try to make it sound like I am the perfect homeschooling parent and I produce nothing but prodigies, and I'm not going to come for I'm realistic. Realistically speaking, my children who graduated from homeschool are successful. They are happy. I have another one graduating this year, and I have friends who homeschool. I can actually say that now because at my new church there are other homeschoolers, and I never had that before. But so many of us are trying to come forward and help the parents who kind of felt pushed into it and weren't prepared for it. And we have always been there. Like, we have always been there on Twitter. We have always been there on YouTube. We have always been there on Instagram, where we call ourselves homeschool influencers. And it's really because we have a passion for helping other homeschooling parents. In my case, I especially enjoy helping new homeschooling parents. But since there is this tidal wave of new people coming in and homeschooling, especially maybe some more like blue check people might have decided that they were going to homeschool for like the last 6 months, and so now they all of a sudden they're sharing what they learned, which is fine. We all share what they're learning, but that is what people are seeing, and they're not actually getting the advice from seasoned homeschoolers, people who have been doing it for a really long time and who have learned from our mistakes. We're kind of getting drowned out from this tidal wave of new homeschoolers and all of the voices that are coming with it. So just be very choosy about where you're accepting advice from. And also, this is the last thing, and this is something that I actually talked about in another video a couple years ago. It's like I almost saw this coming. It hasn't come yet, but it is something that I fear, and it's another reason that I'm really worried at this point about the rise in homeschooling. And again, this has to do with the sheer number. The government really counts on children. They want to indoctrinate that next generation. That is what school is about. It's not about education. It is about raising obedient factory workers, obedient drones, people who will not question the things that they are told. And so they just want to kind of pump them out like on a nice little factory setting, or is that the word I'm looking for? Assembly line. They just want to pop them out. And this whole thing with all of these homeschoolers, I think when I started homeschooling, there were 2.5% of the population was homeschooling, and now it's at like 16.1% or something like that. It's pretty high. It's much higher. Don't quote me on that, but it's a lot more. And they're not going to like that. So what's going to happen is I mentioned the taxes earlier, and I can definitely see the government looking at all these people that they know, these children who are no longer in their government indoctrination centers. They're not there anymore. And they're going to think, all right, it's time to start cracking down on these homeschoolers. They might start out with higher regulations, more oversight on homeschoolers. And you've got a lot of groups out there with people who have vendettas about homeschooling or who don't like the idea of parents raising and educating their own children. So, of course, they are going to be right with the government. The government loves people like that, and they're going to use people like that as their spokesman for putting more regulations on homeschooling. And with all these new homeschoolers who are looking for taxes and looking for all kinds of rebates and everything, all the government would have to say to them is, okay, we will give you your such and such an amount of money for each child that you're homeschooling, but here's what you're going to have to start doing. And that is going to ripple like dominoes. That is the better scenario. The second scenario that I'm worried about is just that they will outlaw homeschooling completely, like Germany did, because it has completely backfired. Now it's no longer some fringe group of extremists who are homeschooling their children. It's people from every walk of life who are taking the reins on their child's education and are saying enough is enough. And I'm fearful that eventually the government is going to say, okay, that's it. It's time that we put an end to this. And that's why, friends, it's so important that you just be careful about the things that you ask for and try to really break free of that idea that institutionalized learning, the way that school does it, is the only way. Because that is something else, is that if you continue to try to do things like school did it, you have a much higher chance of burning out. I did it myself. I tried to replicate school the first 2 years of homeschooling, and I sent my kids back to school for 2 years until I pulled them out again. I thought, this is nuts. Something has to change. And I regret those 2 years that I sent my children back so much, but I've been able to use that to help others, that experience. So really think about who you're listening to. Think about what you're asking for. And please realize that when there are a large number of voices, you're going to affect everyone. That's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one either here or over on Instagram. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.